Okay, Dom, so how's your day going so far?
So far, so good. Just finished a nice long run, and I like the weather. It was raining here this morning, so it was nice. Yeah. How about
Nice.
yourself?
Oh, I'm doing good. Where are you at? Where it's
I'm in
raining?
Los Angeles, in the Los Feliz area. Close to the park there, so I can go run every day. It's really nice.
So, were you originally from France?
No, sir, I was not. I'm originally from Belgium. I was born in Belgium, grew up in Belgium, but I was in the military in France. So that's why I think a lot of people they think I'm originally from France. But I'm a
Yeah, that's the
Belgian
same
born.
here. That's what I was thinking.
Right. Yeah, I'm a Belgian born. I grew up speaking Flemish, which is the same as Dutch, what people speak in the Netherlands. And then later in the military, I learned French and other languages and stuff. Yes.
Nice. So, at this point, how many languages can you speak?
My German is still all right, and English, Flemish and Dutch and Afrikaans are almost the same. And then French. I speak a little bit Japanese too because my wife is Japanese. So I'm kind of forced to learn that. And, when I was younger, I used to go to Japan a lot to practice martial arts. And I tried to because my wife speaks Japanese with my kids. So I tried to conversate with him too in French and in Japanese and in English, tried to keep it all up.
Well, that sounds like a lot to juggle, but I don't want to, keep talking about your personal life forever. Let me ask you about, Hell Hath No Fury and exactly what your part was in this. I've already spoken with a couple people from the
Okay.
film. I spoke with the director,
Yes.
and I'm kind of excited to hear your perspective. Did you do choreography on this, or were you like, what was the extent of your work on this?
I played a character called Clement, which was a very interesting character, and it was really cool for me to play him. He's a free French resistance fighter. And when I read the script originally, I kind of imagined, because of my age, that he could have been a French Foreign Legionnaire in World War One before he became a free French resistance fighter during World War Two, which is Hell Had No Fury is set in during World War Two. So it would make sense for him to know about explosives and guns and all that stuff that he would have served in the First War before he became a free French resistance fighter during the Second War. And I did a lot of research on the Free French and the Maquis and those guys. All of these guys, they were fighting alongside the British commandos known as the SAS behind enemy lines before the Normandy invasion and all that stuff. So it was a very interesting character for me to get into and to do the research on and kind of look at the similarities in my life of being a soldier and kind of put it together with the Clement character.
So were you did you work with the director on anything prior to this? Like, did he write this character in mind for you, or did it just happen to be that there were so many parallels there between yourself and Clement?
Jesse and myself, we go back since Mortal Kombat, like the first Mortal Kombat. Jesse was the second AD on that, and I played a small part and then ended up replacing one of the guys that played Sub-Zero when he hurt himself. And that's how Jesse and I met. And from then on, we stayed friends because Jesse was really interested in military stuff and martial arts. And we both loved filmmaking. Like we both loved Akira Kurosawa's films and the old spaghetti westerns and Peckinpah and all. So we had a lot in common when it came to that. And we just always stayed in contact after Mortal Kombat and stayed friends. We started doing reels together and then made a short film called Death Row the Tournament. And then we finally both of us funded together a movie called The Doorman that we originally then changed to The Honorable when we recut it and re-edited. And we kind of kept working together now more than 20 years.
That's pretty awesome. So then, do you know if he wrote the character with you in mind, or did he approach you after realizing that the character was so
He
similar?
approached me when he got the job, and he says, Dominic, I have this character that I think you would be perfect for, the Clement character. And then when he sent me the script and I started reading the script, I'm like, wow, this guy is like, has a lot, even though it's a really different setting. It's World War II. It's a period piece. It's not today. It's not contemporary. He has a lot in common with my life. The fact that he was, I imagined him being a French Foreign Legionnaire and then being a free French fighter and all of that stuff. The only thing that I didn't have in common with Clement, that he was madly in love with the main character is played by Nina Bergman, Marie, and it's a one-sided love because she doesn't care about him. She just uses him to get to her objective of what she wants to accomplish. That was the only thing I didn't have in common with Clement, because I never was in love with a woman or pursued a woman that didn't like me. I knew at a very early age, young enough, that if a girl is not into you, you move on and you go on your way. You don't push it like. But that was probably the most difficult part for me to act, because I haven't had that in real life. But Clement was a very interesting character, very nuanced character, to say the least, because he was also a little bit unstable, from whether it was from a lot of combat that he had seen. And then when George gets killed, he loses it completely and keeps seeing him as a ghost and stuff like that. So I thought this is a cool character to get into. And to be honest with you, Jesse and I had just come off a movie called The Mercenary that we shot not so long ago, which was a feature film that I produced. The character I took from a graphic novel that I worked on. And when Jesse called me for this, some of the locations where we were shooting were similar locations. And I said, wow, this is a completely different character than any of the characters I ever played. And in The Mercenary, I was carrying the film. Here, it's a smaller part. And to be honest with you, I like to do smaller character parts, because you can have all your focus on discovering who this character is, and you don't have to carry the whole movie. Someone else is doing it. So it's a lot more playful. It's a lot more fun for me to do.
So kind of as a side note to that, kind of a sidebar before I come back to Hell Hath No Fury, there was one of my favorite movies is Gangs of New York, and you had a supporting role in that as well. Do you feel like that's when you first started realizing how deeply you can explore these side characters, as one of the dead rabbits, or was that like just were you so wrapped up in things at the time
that thing came about so, how would I say, unexpected, because I wasn't hired as an actor on that movie.
You were choreographer, right?
I was a coordinator for all the action sequences, and I was hired by the action director, Vic Armstrong, whose brother I had worked with on a Tim Burton commercial campaign. And Andy had introduced me to Vic, and he said, you got to use this guy to train Leonardo in martial arts, because he knows a lot of the period style martial arts. And originally what I did is, when I started training Leonardo, I wanted to train him in a style called savate des rues, which is, today they call it boxe française or French kickboxing, but it originated as a street fighting style, which was called savate or savate des rues, as they call it in French. But then Leonardo had a bad knee injury where he had surgery, so he couldn't do the kicks. So I changed my whole plan and started training Leonardo in catch-a-can wrestling, which is an old period style too, that the type of wrestling, and Irish bare knuckle boxing. So I started training him in that. And then when we did a bunch of like demo tapes for Martin Scorsese, I got a call from Martin Scorsese's people, and they wanted me to fly out to New York to meet with Marty and with Daniel Day-Lewis. Because then Marty, when he saw the tapes, he wanted me to teach Daniel knife fighting and that kind of stuff too. I went over to New York, met with Marty and Daniel, and that's how that all came about. And then when I came back to Los Angeles to keep training Leo, Scorsese called me, and he says, Dominic, do you want to come on as the fight coordinator and the choreographer for all the action scenes in the movie? Long story short, I ended up coordinating all the battle and fight scene and training these guys on Gangs of New York. And when my work was finished as a coordinator, out of the blue, Marty on set says, hey, Dominic, you got a great face. He goes, would you mind playing one of the Dead Rabbit members? Because we're gonna cast an extra member called Tommy, who's one of the rabbits. And I'm like, Scorsese is asking me to play a part in a movie, even though it's a small part. And I'm like, sure. And I think he originally did it because we got along great for the 10 months or so that I was coordinating. And then towards the end of the movie, I think Marty wanted me to stay on. And that's why he offered me the part of Tommy as one of the Dead Rabbits. And that's when I really started getting the acting bug. I got into acting also because I had issues with anxiety that somehow came up when I was in my 30s, maybe stuff from my past when I was a soldier or whatever. And before that I was doing mostly stunts and choreography and stuff like that. And I realized that the acting thing helped me with my social anxiety. So I started taking acting classes and getting into the whole thing, started doing plays. And then little by little, I started playing these like smaller character parts of bad guys and hitmen and stuff like that. And then it evolved into what it's become today, playing very nuanced character like this Clement character. And I really enjoy acting. It like I said, it helps me with my social anxiety.
That's incredible. And just to focus for a sec, I want to know how long it takes you when you're training somebody. So like when you're teaching, you know, certain fight styles to Leo, or you were like teaching the knife fighting to Daniel Day-Lewis, how extensive is that process?
It all depends on the individual and how dedicated that individual is. Now with big stars, a lot of times, you know, especially on $100 million or more movies, you have a big star that might not have the time to commit 100%, or that is not willing to do the training 100%. It all depends on the individual. Daniel Day-Lewis was a very dedicated individual. So was Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson was just came off a bad injury when he was in Gangs of New York. He'd been in a motorcycle accident and he could barely walk. We had 3 different stunt doubles for him, but he still insisted on doing most of the stuff himself. So I had to work around that because I was dealing with Liam, who came with bad injuries.
Yeah.
And like I said, it really depends on the individual. The thing is with big budget movies, you have all that time, but sometimes you might have a star that doesn't want to give you all that time to prep for that. And on the smaller movies, you have guys that are really eager to do the work and that want to put in the time, but you don't have the budget. So you have budget constraints, you have prep time constraints and all of these things. So you got to juggle the two. And that's what makes the filmmaking so interesting. I think it's such an interesting process sometimes, especially on the smaller films, all the difficulties you face. On Hell Had No Fury, that movie was filmed in an undisclosed location, in different locations, where we were in the middle of COVID when that thing was going on. So we had our crew and our actors that had to be tested regularly. And some of the actors and crew, they lived in trailers and in an abandoned house with no electricity close to one of the sets that we were filming, which was dedicated on all of the people parts that were involved. But at the same time, I was glad to be working because nothing was going on in the middle of COVID. There weren't the vaccines yet, none of that stuff.
Yeah, Jesse said it kind of felt like a family setting because everybody, like, it was limited, but you guys were also close together.
Right.
Right. So when you were, obviously you played Clement in this, did you have to juggle that with any choreography or any fight stunt coordinating, or did you specifically
No,
act in
I
this?
specifically acted in this film. We had our regular coordinator, Luc Lafontaine, which has been working with, he came up with Jesse and I doing stunts and choreography and all that stuff. And Luke and Jesse, those guys like myself, we've worked together for probably close to 2 decades. And he's a regular guy when it comes to stunt coordinating on the indie films. And he also plays a lot of character parts in the movie. So Luke had that all under control, and I could just focus 100% on the Clement character.
So is that kind of where your head is now? Is you would like to focus more on acting and being able to focus on acting instead of having to juggle multiple parts?
I never really pursued the coordinating thing. In fact, the last coordinating gig that I did was way back when I did Beowulf with Angelina Jolie and Anthony Hopkins. And the reason I took that job was because I had friends that had, you know, a longer period of stay in the hospital for some incident that he had. And he needed money, and I had some other people that hadn't worked in a while, that if I took that job, I was going to be able to hire these guys. And that's the reason that I took Beowulf. I found out later that I was up against the great Wu Ping, the Chinese director and wire guy that, you know, did all the stuff here in America that made the wire stuff popular after Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and all of that stuff. So I found out that I was up against him, and I got the job. Not because I was better, I don't think. Probably because I was a lot cheaper than him. I'm sure his price tag was a lot higher than mine. But anyway, it did the thing to where I could hire my friends that were in need of work. But now I think I would, you know, especially now that I'm married and I have a almost 2-year-old kid, I would focus on both. I would focus on coordinating, but mostly on the acting. I really enjoy acting and getting into the characters and doing the research and imagining what those characters that I'm about to play would be like. Because there's one thing reading something on a script, you read the lines, okay, maybe what he's thinking and stuff like that, but you don't, in the script, it doesn't necessarily say, how is he standing? How does he move? What does he eat? How does he smell? All these things. So that's something you can build upon that to me is really interesting, artistic in a way.
So you've done two with Hell Hath No Fury and Gangs of New York. You've done at least two period pieces. And I imagine
Beowulf was a Viking story, which is period, you know, which was all. I love period pieces because it gives you a reason to do a lot of research on some of the history that might have been real. Some of it might be fictionalized, and you kind of combine the two, and you take the best of both worlds, and in the end, you have 10% of those two worlds maybe mixed with what you put to it. So it's very interesting because when I was a kid, I always loved history because of the war. When you go out throughout history, there's a lot of war when you go way back to the Middle Ages, even before that. And that's what made history always so interesting to me. And also the human behavior that we haven't learned much about history except for repeating the same mistakes that we made so many times over and over again. So it's kind of a human study at the same time that it's a period study or what so.
do you feel like your research, that like the extensive research that you've done in those roles has changed the way you prepare for roles in regular films?
I think when I read a script, I always think if I met that character that I'm reading about, that's saying those lines, if I met him on a bus, what would he be like? If I met him, let's say at the Starbucks or at a restaurant, if I bumped into him, even, you know, how would he talk to me? So it's a deeper, you know, human focus on what he would be like if he was not a fictional character, if he was a real character.
So with this, with you had mentioned Mortal Kombat. To switch back to that for just a sec, you had said that's where you and Jesse had first met. How did you become involved with Mortal Kombat? Because this is decades back in your career,
Right.
obviously. Can you explain how that kind of came about?
Sure. When I first came to the United States, I came from Thailand, and I had moved to Thailand after I got injured in Yugoslavia during the war there. And then after the war in Yugoslavia, I spent quite some time in Thailand living in a boxing camp and competing once a month. And when I came to LA, I was living at the YMCA in Hollywood, believe it or not. I was renting a little room there, living in the YMCA. And I was teaching kickboxing and judo classes at the YMCA too. And I met a character called Stephen Quadros, which has the nickname the Fight Professor. You know, he used to do all the Pride shows where he commentates and all of that stuff. But he saw me train one day, and he told me that Benny the Jet Urquidez, who back then was one of the most famous American kickboxers and was one of the few American kickboxers, together with Don Wilson, that was fighting with leg kicks. It's like Dutch style kickboxing where they kick the legs too. And he was telling me that Benny was looking for a Dutch style kickboxer and Muay Thai specialist to bring in for his coming out of retirement fight. And that's how I got hired by Benny the Jet to help him prep for his world title fight against Nagami, and also work as a sparring partner and trainer for some of his elite kickboxers. And then as I was working for Benny, a casting person came to the Jet Center, and they were casting characters that were fighters for Mortal Kombat. And the casting lady, who, if I recall well, was Fern Champion, she asked Sensei Benny, you know, who's the guy with all the scars on his body with a shaved head? And he said, that's the guy that is a European guy that just came in from Thailand, that is working with us, getting me ready for my fight. And they asked if I could go in for an audition for Mortal Kombat. I went in for the audition and I got the job. And that's how I got into the movie industry. Then after that, very soon after that, I got the very forgettable movie Barbed Wire with Pamela Anderson, in which I play one of the characters, one of the bad guys. And then I just kept doing it, kept doing little parts, stunt and choreography, worked my way up to coordinating. And then more and more I got into acting, because that's what really, you know, it fascinates me the most about human behavior and about studying characters and such and such.
And you had said that you had played a bit of Sub-Zero in the Mortal Kombat, correct? You said you stepped in for that. How, what was the extent of that? Like, did you do a lot of filming for that, or?
It was funny because the character, I played the ninja. Maybe you've seen the little scene. I'm the first guy that gets killed by Sub-Zero in the movie. The guy that throws all the punches and the kicks and stuff like that, and then jumps up into the air, then gets frozen by Sub-Zero. And that guy, Francois, the guy I was playing Sub-Zero, ended up hurting his back pretty bad. And then I ended up, me and one other guy was a gymnast. We ended up doing all the stuff for Sub-Zero after he got hurt. So we were on that for quite a bit.
That's pretty cool. So we've obviously talked about your past, and we talked about what you plan on doing in the future. Do you have any other projects that are coming out now that you would like to talk about, or anything that you're working on?
I'm planning and hoping that as this COVID dies down a little bit more and things become more normal, I hope to do the Mercenary Part 2, obviously, because that did very well for Redbox and Amazon Prime. It was a cult little independent movie that I funded with my own savings, and I had friends of mine put some money towards. And I would really like to do the Mercenary Part 2 and hopefully maybe get it off into a series of films, because that originally came about, the Max character in the Mercenary came from a graphic novel that I was working on for Magic Leap Studios. I was an executive board member there, and I was developing this graphic novel. But then when big investors became part of the company, they decided that it was too violent and had graphic sex scenes and all of that stuff. They decided not to do the graphic novel, and I took that one character and developed and did my own movie, The Mercenary.
So was the graphic novel under the same name, The Mercenary, or was that just a character
No,
from?
the graphic novel was called Vive la Mort, which means Long Live Dead in French. But Max, the Mercenary, was one of the characters in the graphic novel. And there's a bunch of characters within that graphic novel that are called passengers. And they're people, when they get killed, they can travel back on another person that is close by dying on his last lifeline. Like, say there's someone 300 meters away or a village away that is dying while the person is getting killed, he can travel back on that person's lifeline as he's dying and then morphs into his body. So they call passengers those characters. And the Max character is one of those characters. In the first Mercenary film, we never touch on that and explain it. He gets his throat cut in the movie. And in the movie, you think he survives, but he really traveled back on a junkie that was dying's lifeline when he gets found by the priest that saves him.
So is that something that you're hoping to explore with Mercenary 2 and kind of explain a bit more?
Definitely. Because in the first one, we had, like I said, budget constraints, time constraints, all of these things. We couldn't really go into that. We see him get his throat cut and walk through this like burned out area that is like hell almost, where he's walking to purgatory, and that's before he comes back into the junkie that is dying and morphs into his body right before the priest finds him and then takes him back to the church and nourishes him back to health. But it's never explained that he's one of those passengers, because Max is 170 years old, but we never explain it in the film. So people think, oh, he got his throat cut, but he survives that when he bleeds out like that. So it's never explained. Hopefully in the next one, we can explain and touch more on that when we have a better budget.
I've never seen the Mercenary. When did that come out?
It came out last year, and because of COVID, we were supposed to have, through Uncork, the company and Evolutionary Films, we were supposed to get a limited theatrical release. But because of COVID, it went straight to streaming, and it did very well for Redbox and Amazon. It's a hyper-violent martial arts actioner.
So is there like, what's the cast like in that film? And is there anybody specifically that you're hoping to bring back for the second one?
I worked with Louis Mandalore, who I also worked with in Hell Had No Fury. Great character actor, all-around good guy. and Lewis played the bad guy in the Mercenary. So he gets killed in the Mercenary in the end, but I want to bring him back as his twin brother for the second Mercenary, because it was such fun to work with Lewis. And Lewis and I go way back to, we actually met 20 years or so ago when I was living at the YMCA, and him and his brother Costas Mandalore, they would come and train at the YMCA. Louis is a really good boxer, and that's where we met, and then didn't see each other for years. Worked with his brother Costas on Beowulf, on the Angelina Jolie flick, and then just got reintroduced to Louis when he was working on the Debt Collector movie with Scott Adkins. We hit it off again as if we met the day before. And I told Jesse, I said, you got to bring in Louis to come and work on the Mercenary. And Louis really, he made me shine in that movie by being very generous as an actor. A lot of actors, they want to take all the spotlight to them, but Louis, he's a very, very giving guy, and he made me look great in that movie. And then we worked again on Hell Had No Fury. He plays one of the American GIs, and Timothy Murphy plays one of the other guys. Timothy and I worked on a movie called The Honorable way back when he first came from Ireland. He was working on a TV series there. He did The Honorable with me, which was one of his first projects here in America. And then he went on, obviously, to do big stuff with Jane Fonda and do Sons of Anarchy.
Sons of Anarchy,
the guy's everywhere. Just a proper character actor, really good actor. So to work with him again on Hell Had No Fury was fantastic.
That's awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I want to know, is there anything that you want readers or listeners to know about Hell Hath No Fury that we didn't touch on? Or is there any social media or websites that you'd like them to go to find more about you?
If people love poetry, they can go to Dominique Vandenberg on YouTube. I write a lot of poetry that talks about my past and the experiences I had as a 2-rep paracommando in the French Foreign Legion, and later as an independent soldier, all of that stuff. I also want people to know that Hell Had No Fury, has drama, suspense, and action with a twist, and it is a non-stop thrill ride.
All right.